Hey Marsh, why are you so obsessed with comics? What's the big deal anyway?
Now, growing up, I didn't always have tons of access to comic books, but here and there they kind of made their way into my life. And probably the first place I could think of where it brought, where I first found out about comics was my dad, actually. He had some old Superman comics, and they were the comics he had as a kid as well. And it's rare that people save their comics sometimes, but he had a box full, and there's a few Batman in there, some Superman. That was his favorite, was Superman. And so I would read those, and I thought they were really cool and interesting and imaginative. But they were just something I would read from time to time when I went to go see him and stuff. And I did often ask for them, and I thought they were really cool. Fast forward to a little bit of an older time, I came to find out about comics through actually going to a comic book store. My dad's introduction to comics for me sparked a curiosity, and I happened to see a comic book store as we were driving around, and I asked if I could go in there, and he brought me there. And that was when I first saw X-Force #1, which was a comic, kind of an offshoot of X-Men. And it was just, it was amazing. I was excited by the energy and the art, and just kind of the imagination, and it just really hit me in the right place and time, really. At that time, things like Terminator 2 were around, and just different movies, RoboCop, and I don't know, there's just a lot of like action movies and things that actually my dad was introducing me to some of these things. And so it really reflected things I was already into, so it was pretty cool. Now, I came into comics especially because of art and things like that, but what comics really is, it's an amazing form of storytelling that has had a great tradition. And the thing is story, I think, is really what makes comics as important as it is. It's a unique medium where it combines words and pictures in a really interesting marriage of a final product and a final piece of art, a final piece of literature. And it's really cool. A lot of people get into it and they find different lessons through these stories. Story is huge. Story is like probably one of the most important things in the world, really. They're intrinsic to survival. Back in the days, when we were starting to figure out, in the history of humanity, how to do things and how to survive things, we would tell stories about how we would avoid being eaten by a lion or something, or how one person got eaten by a lion because they went in the wrong area. So there would be these stories that were like cautionary tales, and they would help us, like I said, to survive, but also they help us to enrich our lives. So they cause us to be entertained, they cause us to learn things, they cause us to find out and understand the world around us, like things in society or things about nature. There's all kinds of things we can gain from story, and also entertainment. It brings joy to our lives, and it's just an amazing thing, story is. And comic books is one of the coolest ways to tell a story, in my opinion. It's a place where imagination can run wild. You don't have to worry about trying to depict it in a real life manner like a live action movie. Before we had the ability to really show these kind of fantastic environments on the screen, we had comic books that could do it just by using a pencil and a paper, and other means of creating these things. So there's a lot of power in comics, and that doesn't mean that they're irrelevant now that we can do some of those things. We still can do things in comics that we can't do in movies. Bringing it into the design, the graphic design, the page turn. There's all kinds of things that make comic books unique and awesome in its own right, and same as any medium, so it's really cool. The idea for this video came about when my wife showed me a meme recently that kind of showed the picture of a bunch of different creative people, famous creative people that we know and love, and kind of what they contributed through their creativity. One of the people was Jim Henson, and under it said life. Another one was Bob Ross, and then under it said peace. Mr. Rogers said self-love, and then of course Stan Lee said imagination. So these are kind of the messages that creative people bring to us through their stories and through their art. Now, obviously not all of these people represent comic creators, but they all have been part of the creative realm of the society that most of us live in, and they've brought some enrichment to our life, some and a message as well. We underestimate what art brings to us, and it's actually very important, almost just as important as things like doctors and scientists and things like that. If we didn't have art, it would make a lot of this other stuff almost unbearable in life, and it also, we wouldn't learn some of the lessons. I often tell the story of, I learned a lot of different facts and events and things that happened in history, but I never really learned them until I read a story about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, or when I read Night, which was about the Holocaust. That's what really impacted me, not just a bunch of facts and figures that I had to regurgitate on a test. Not that that's necessarily bad, but it's just something, I learned more, I learned better from story, So this is, comics are a great way to illustrate things. I just was watching a documentary about quantum physics and just basically math, and how math works and is basically the language of how the world is kind of created, and it's really amazing. And math was one of the most boring topics, in school. Like, it was one of the toughest subjects. But if they had taught me in a way that showed me how amazing it was through a story, I think I would have been a lot more excited about it. Comics have brought us such lessons as, things like with Spider-Man, with much power comes great responsibility, things like that. And, it brought to our minds questions of justice with things like Batman and stuff like that. It brought us discussions on racism and what's fair and what's not with comic books like X-Men and many, those are just superhero comics. So I think what comics has brought us is pretty priceless, and the potential for it to bring us so much more is pretty much infinite, wouldn't you think?